Richard, hi, how are you doing today?
Hi, Simon. I'm very good, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the Pod Leaders podcast today, brought to you by Thornton Gregory. Appreciate you taking time out your busy schedule to do this recording. Has it been a busy start to the year for you so far?
It has, yeah. It has a variety of different things going on, including some clients that I'm working with and a playbook that we published that I'm sure we'll come on to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, the title of today's episode for people that haven't, tuned in before is we're going to cover a couple of different themes within the episode, but it's around how companies, early stage companies, can find product market fit, and then also once that's kind of been found or on the way to be found, and they start to scale, how the RVP Playbook can help scale SaaS businesses, which is something that we'll talk about in more depth and detail in a minute. But Richard's obviously authored that alongside one of his sort of co-hosts or co-pilots, however you want to call it, Jason Creane, who's an excellent sales leader and actual RVP in the space for Zscaler. But just more broader context on this. So my name's Simon Gregory. I'm a director of Thornton Gregory. We're a recruitment company that sit within the scale up and startup ecosystem. So I've got nearly 10 years of working within that space, supporting ad tech and martech companies with their go-to-market hiring plans and teams across EMEA and North America. The reason why we're doing these episodes and creating this kind of series is because I've built a really good network over that 10 years and bumped into some amazing people that have some great unique stories about the space and how they've scaled businesses or been kind of influential within that scaling exercise. And I just thought, from a community perspective, I think it's a shame that we can't unpack some of that and give back a little bit. So if you go onto YouTube or some of the other channels that we post this, there's different episodes that span things around go-to-market leadership. I've done some episodes around RevOps, sales enablement, professional services and customer success, and also things around pre-sales. And product marketing, product market fit is obviously fundamentally important to how companies succeed or fail. So that's why I thought it would be great to bring Richard on today. Okay, so that's a little bit of kind of background here. I guess I bumped into Richard when he was over at Permitive. I think it was, am I right to say it was like 2017, 2018, I think?
Yeah, around then we first met.
Yeah. So the company had some funding and a super cool bit of tech that was really leveraging edge computing and disrupting the DMP space. A really great story, London headquartered, which I absolutely loved. And Richard was very early on into that. When we met before, we joked about, being the first handful of employees. I'm sure he'll share more about that. But that company went on to do great things and scaled, to significant revenue, signed some amazing customers, which Richard was involved in. And the reason why I thought the perspective that Richard could bring was awesome because he's held a number of different roles there. So, BD partnerships, I believe, in your earlier career, product marketing, sales enablement, and then obviously go-to-market leadership. So that kind of lens will hopefully enable some great perspective and insight into how companies can navigate this exercise of going 0 to 1. So long intro, but we've cut the episode into two kind of themes. The first part is around pushing towards product marketing and product market fit, as I've touched upon. The second part of this is the RVP Playbook bit. So Richard, if it's okay, should we jump into some of these questions?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, cool. All right, perfect. So look, I've given you a very short intro, so hopefully I haven't stolen too much of the thunder there. But for people that don't know you, can you share a little bit about your sort of career today and your story?
Yeah, of course. So I've worked in startups. I actually had to remind myself of this date this morning. I've worked in startups since 1998, which is quite a long time. So that's probably back before startups were even a thing, I think. But rather than talk to you about that whole history, the last 10 years, I guess, I've been in two different founding teams. So I've been in the founding team of an e-commerce startup called Pack Coffee, and I've been in the founding team of Permitive that you just mentioned, a SaaS business building technology for media owners. And in both of those examples, I've been in the company from kind of a seed stage through Series A and then, future growth. And interestingly, the worlds of e-commerce and kind of SaaS software in some ways don't seem that similar. I think lots of the things that I went through in terms of how those companies grew and found customers and got further investment, there's actually lots of common themes, despite the fact the industries and the products are quite different. So yeah, that's a little introduction, I guess, to me and what I've done.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Just in terms of that 20 or 10 year segment that you reference, I always like asking guests about key moments and mentors or managers, because obviously that can be accelerant or decelerant within your particular careers. Have you had any people that have stood out in your career development, and if so, and why?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you work in startups, I mean, you meet a real mix of different people. And I think I've been really, really fortunate to work for like a range. And I think a couple of really visionary leaders, Stephen, the CEO of Pact, Joe, the CEO of Permutive, not only exceptional people, but people who kind of see almost like you feel they have an ability to see the future, to set a vision for the company, and, amazing people to learn from. I've worked with some brilliant managers as well. So Amit over at Permutive was a brilliant manager, taught me an awful lot about product marketing, for example. One thing I thought was interesting when I was reflecting on the question as well is I often think, I've learned a lot from those around me as well. So whether that is observing how other leaders do their jobs and run their teams, even if you don't work directly for them, and also learning a lot from people that I've hired. I often think there's something around you want to hire someone who's better than you at a particular role. So again, they're like building enablement at Permutive, product marketing at Permutive. Got to work with some exceptional people and kind of feel like I learned a lot from people in my team, just as I've learned from kind of mentors or leaders above me as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So I mentioned that part of the episode is around product market fit, but as we all know, companies have varying success on that. Can take in a huge array of efforts and time to get to that kind of point. Is there any guidance? And I know you advise early stage startups, as we touched upon there, but is there any guidance or advice that you would give founders, new founders, that can accelerate that kind of effort?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a couple of nuggets on this. I mean, I do think it's hard. It is hard to find product market fit. It can take companies a long time. And I do think, and I've been in these situations, it can feel like you're really beating your head against a wall. Like you have created something that you think the whole world should be using and you think everybody should care about, but nobody will care about it as much as you do in your company. I think the things that I've found interesting about this, number one, I think the companies that I've worked in where we've found product market fit, we've had like a relentless focus on trying to find product market fit. So that is a focus on kind of everything to do with how we articulate the product, go out and demo the product, listen to feedback about the product. But so much of that has come from just this kind of relentless focus on trying to find it, which sounds obvious. But at the same time, I think if you don't focus and double down on how will you get people using it, how will you get feedback and so on, it's very, very hard to find product market fit. A couple of other things I've noticed, or I guess the patterns where I've seen it working well. I think trying to find product market fit within like one or two customer verticals. So I think people can run into real problems when they think I've built a product in say a B2B SaaS sense. I've built a product, well, any company could use it. I think zoning in on the one or two kind of categories or verticals that you think your product has a fit in is a much more effective way of either validating or eliminating those verticals than trying to go really, really wide. And the other thing I think, and again, kind of a pattern here, and funnily enough, this is a pattern from e-commerce at Pact or B2B SaaS at Permutive. I definitely think there's a lot in how do you learn as much as possible about your customers. Why would they care about your product? What would they do with your product? What are the outcomes they drive if they used it? And I think if you're trying to find product market fit, really obsessing over the customers, their use cases, the value they derive from it. Again, it feels really, really obvious, but I think it's just something you have to be super focused on trying to understand. And I also think, in those early stage companies, So let's say there's 5 of you sat there in a startup. It is everybody's job in that startup to find product market fit. It's not the salesperson's job or the CEO's job or the CTO's job. It's a real kind of team effort, I think, that drives like the pursuit of product market fit, I suppose I'd say.
So it's the real wearing lots of hats analogy, yeah, getting out there and just, rubbing your hat into everything possible within the team, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you've got, if you have a team, as probably most startups do, if you have a team that is probably between, let's say, 3 and 10 people, you've built something, you're taking it out, you want people to start paying you for it, and you want people to start using it. I really believe like everybody in that team is driving towards product market fit. It's not just down to 1 or 2 people. It's kind of a common cause. And ultimately, if you don't find it, you're not going to be in business for very long. So that's why it's kind of this real kind of shared mission, I think, of trying to find it.
Okay, cool. So I guess, are there any other themes or consistent reasons that companies are successful in finding that product market fit and beginning to actually scale the business over and above what we just discussed?
Yeah, sure. So I think of this again in kind of 2 or 3 different ways. The first, and again, sometimes I think when you talk about these things or you read about these things, you think, well, that's obvious. But the first is I think you have to attach yourself to a problem that's worth solving. So I think that for the company, for the individuals in the company and the team mission, you are there because you've built some technology that you believe solves a problem for a bunch of people. But I think that problem has to be worth solving. Has to be worth solving for the company because you have to feel motivated to solve it yourselves. You have to feel like it's a problem that's going to be attached to value, so people will pay you for it. And I think it's motivating. Ultimately, it's motivating to feel like you're going to solve a problem for a whole bunch of people in a category or a vertical. The second thing is, I think you have to find, and this is like a super, super valuable lesson we learned at Permutive, you have to find a bunch of early adopters for your solution, and you have to find people who are going to see past your shortcomings. So chances are, if you've built a SaaS solution, you've built some technology and you want to go out and sell it, it's not going to be the finished article. There's going to be gaps, there's going to be things it doesn't do, there's going to be the odd bug. Those early adopter customers will say, I can see enough in this that I'm going to test it and I'm going to use it and I'm going to feed back on it and I'm going to attach it to this problem I think is worth solving. And those early adopters will forgive you gaps in the product. They'll forgive you the things that don't quite work. They'll forgive you the integration you haven't built yet because they really believe they can see past the shortcomings and they really believe it's going to solve problems they care about. So my personal experience of this is if you find those early adopters, it's almost like they supercharge the way that your product can be adopted and used. And by the way, obviously mean early adopters within your customers. And the third piece on this, which I think is a big accelerant as well, is I think you have to target organizations that have the ability to buy your product in its form that might be quite early. And what I mean by that is, I think, let's just say that you've built a product and there's 3 tiers of customer. There's like the corporation tier. So, there's the 20,000 person company that could use it. There's the 5,000 person company. And there's the 500 person company. Chances are, if you're trying to find product market fit, I think it can be very hard to go to the big corporations and be able to go through like whole procurement processes for products when what you have is a little bit wobbly around the edges and isn't the finished article. So I definitely think if you have that combination of kind of early adopters who are willing to forgive you some of the shortcomings, and you have organizations where you are able to get through almost like a quick procurement process, or maybe no procurement process at all, because they're not set up to kind of have those complicated processes, I feel like those are kind of pretty good ingredients for finding people that will start using it. So, often I find myself when I say this thinking, damn, I wish I knew this. Wish I knew this 10 years ago. But those are examples, I think, of ways in which I've seen sales cycles, say, supercharged, but also seen sales cycles stall because the opposite has been true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And the early adopters piece, like, I guess you have to try to, is that all about storytelling to this? Because clearly, maybe you haven't sold to a similar type of business. So they have to kind of see the future state of that product. Is that, and are there any, and is that around sort of risk management with that particular buyer? Like, how did, like, can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I actually think a good example here, or a good way I'd describe it, I think of when we took Permitive out and we started selling it to publishers and media companies.
Mm,
Actually, the early adopters were the kinds of people that could have probably worked at Permitive. So they were the
okay.
kinds of people who were very innovative. They wanted to solve problems. They weren't so worried about, is this the perfect solution,
Mm,
perfectly packaged with all the bells and whistles to solve this problem? They were by nature problem solvers, and they wanted to bring things into their company that would have an impact and solve problems. And actually, when I think through some of the people that we met, say in the first year of Permitive, they were people who were probably done quite well working at Permitive, because
mm,
we were a bunch of problem solvers who were building things and trying to learn and iterate really fast. So actually, I think there's probably a pattern that those individuals in those early adopter roles within these different organisations, I think in a way are almost like startup people.
yeah.
It's almost like they're running a little business themselves, so to speak. So they have ideas about things they want to do, and maybe with, say, legacy solutions that are in the market, they think, "Oh, I can't quite do what I want to do," and that's what attracts them to startups that come in with kind of often like new approaches to establish problems, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And I guess you can only find those people from initially speaking to them. They don't, that kind of early, that kind of personality traits, is obviously a theme there. Okay, cool. You spent a lot of your career within early stage startups, all sorts of shapes and sizes, I'm sure, and successes, right? Especially in the advisory work, you say. Are there any common themes where the companies struggle to find the product market fit?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot. I've probably seen like three or four different areas where I think, again, kind of patterns start to emerge. And in saying this, I feel like there's a lot of people out there who are, they're desperately trying to find their first customers. So I definitely think this is more around like what are some patterns rather than it being a critique of like people's efforts, because I feel like a lot of people are working very hard to try and get their technology or their solution adopted. I guess things that I've seen and things I've probably done personally as well. It's like, just because you found product market fit doesn't mean you didn't make a bunch of mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things. One is, I think it is really easy to fall into a trap of obsessing over competitors and thinking, oh no, we've built this approach to this solving this problem, but look at this competitor, they're much more mature than us. They've got more features and functions than us. They've got all these integrations we haven't got. They've got all of this marketing collateral we don't have, and all these different things. And I just think, well, actually, just because there's a competitor in a space does not mean other companies don't have the opportunity to enter that same space. That is progress, and that happens in every category, from like consumer businesses to B2B. I kind of think it's your job, as you try and find product market fit for your startup, to work around that. Like, they're there and they're probably not going anywhere for a while. But if you're going to start to chip away at their market share or approach problems that they have in a different way, it's almost like they're there and they exist, and you just have to constantly problem solve and find ways around what they do. So I think like it's almost like, be aware of competitors, but don't kind of overemphasize or over obsess about like what they do. The second thing I'd say is, I think sometimes you can struggle to find product market fit if you just can't get people to use your product. Because ultimately, until you get people using it, you understand what they're doing with it, the problems they're trying to solve with it, the feedback you get from them, you're really not going to make much progress. So I think it sounds obvious, but just getting people to actually use the product is obviously that's part of the momentum of getting towards product market fit. I think another thing that could hold you back, I suppose, is if you have a bunch of people using your product, but they're actually not solving problems that are either valuable for them to solve or important for them to solve, or they struggle to understand how you solve it in a better way than say an incumbent solution that they've got. So I think it's possible that early customers don't derive the value you expect them to. At Permutive, we had a couple of early customers. We thought, we thought we were the best thing since sliced bread, and surely everybody's going to use this and it's going to be incredible. And actually, we had a couple of customers who said, it's fine, but it's not worth me making a change in my business to adopt this. So, we obsessed over, well, why was that? What went wrong? Was it the product? Was it the customer? Was it something else we did? Is it because we haven't built the right things? So I think you're kind of just trying to learn as much as you possibly can about that at that point in time. And the other thing I'd say, the last one is, I think sometimes when you're struggling to find product market fit, an indicator of that can be that you have a bunch of sales cycles and conversations that either just take absolutely ages and never really make progress, or they just stall altogether. And I think if you have a whole bunch of sales cycles that kind of just end in no result, the customer's saying, look, this is fine, but I'm not sure I really want to go to the lengths of testing it out. And I think if that comes back as a kind of repeatable message, there's a number of reasons it can happen, but I kind of feel like it could be an indicator that you are either, you're focusing on the wrong category, you aren't messaging and positioning your product in the right way, but there's probably something there that would indicate that things are going wrong. So a number of ways you might fix it, but to me, that's also a time suck. It's like you can spend a lot of time going out and talking to these companies and then realize actually that time is in large part wasted. So I think if you see the indicators of that, you have to ask yourself some kind of really, at times, like really tough and honest questions about why is this happening? And what can we do to impact it? Or should we actually just switch gears and, for example, look at a different customer vertical? So yeah, there's some examples for you, I guess.
Yeah, great. I think the examples that you're giving, you're pulling from a slightly different time, being Permutive, but certainly in the current market, people aren't buying nice to haves, are they? So it's got to be that kind of compelling message and quantifiable ROI or value that they're going to see from that swap. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or of course, it's not a swap. It's they're buying this in addition to things they've already got. So they're buying your solution to solve a problem that either they can't solve at all, or they're trying to solve with a little bit of something else, but not a dedicated solution. Then I think it's even trickier because you're basically trying to create, a new line item in your customer's budget for your solution. So maybe they don't have, any budget assigned to something like this today. So then there's a whole nother piece there around, how would you get them to see that it's a big enough problem that they should be assigning budget to try to solve it?
Yeah. You touched upon it a tiny bit there, but I think an important question is, so they've come, so a founder or company or product has gone through this journey and is starting to kind of see some light at the end of the tunnel and some customers and, starting to feel like the product market fit is starting to kind of fit, if you will.
Yeah.
What do you see as those key indicators or key triggers that they're on the right track?
Yeah, I think there's a few, and interestingly, Permutive came through Y Combinator, started at Y Combinator. And there's some brilliant resources around from Y Combinator, from Mark Andreessen on, what are some of these indicators, and what are kind of signals that you're finding product market fit. In my personal experience, there are. And some of these, it's funny, it's hard to really, like perfectly describe them. But when you've been through them, you kind of know. So
the battle scars.
And like all of this, you also learn these things because you often learn the opposite. You learn the customers where, like I said, maybe it's just a bad fit. What do you learn from that? How do you take the learnings on? In terms of like indicators you're finding it, I think you have a sense that the customers that you have are kind of pulling you in. So the customers you have are saying, things like, let me show you what I'm doing with the product, or let me show you how it's fixing these problems for me. And in my experience, the customers are quite energized. They're excited about the fact that they're using your product to solve a problem that they had. They're pretty engaged with you. They want to talk to you. They want you to come in and see them. They want to be on a call, having something demoed to them. But you just have that sense. Probably everybody listening to this would have had the sense of when a customer doesn't want to talk to you.
Yep.
They don't return your calls. They don't return your calls. So this is the opposite. It's like they're really engaged. They want to talk to you. They want to talk to you about the product. Another thing I think is you have a sense that the usage of it, that the people who are signing up and using it is growing. So my example would be Permutive. Say we sold Permutive into a publisher. And in that publisher's team, let's say there were 2 users. So there were 2 people who had a login who could go in and do things in the platform. A sign for us of product market fit was people saying, hey, David and Sarah and John from this team, they want logins and they want to go in and use it as well, which suggested that kind of adoption and usage within that publisher was starting to grow. And, again, users were kind of being pulled in. This is an interesting solution. I want to see it for myself. I want an account so I can use it. And another one, again, and this is, I've found this super interesting, is I think a sign of product market fit is there is an excitement that people want to refer you to people in their network. So at Permutive, we had a couple of publishers who said, hey, are you talking to this publisher over here? Because if you're not, I want to introduce you to someone I know there because I think they would benefit from your product too. So that kind of peer-to-peer, if you like, referral, obviously super valuable for the growth of a company. But to me, you're going to refer someone to a product or a service if you think it's good. You're unlikely to refer them if you don't. And at Permutive, for us, that was definitely a sign that we felt like we had a sense that we were finding product market fit. And then the last one I'd give you, and I'm sure there's more of these, but the last one I'd give you that springs to mind is I feel like you reach a point where you can charge what you feel is like a proper fee for your product. So I think probably most SaaS companies may well at the start say, listen, we will offer this at a very low monthly or annual fee just to get traction, just to get started. So, we want this to be a product that people will pay $100,000 a year for, but we're going to start off with low value contracts, $10,000 a year, just to get that early traction. I feel if you're finding product market fit, you start to find that you can price it at a level that you think, let's call it like a proper level, or a level that you think is a fair fee in exchange for the value that the customer's deriving. So I think pre-product market fit, or very, very early on, it's hard to do that. And I think one of the triggers that allows you to do it is you start to understand more about the problems the customer can solve and the value of solving them. And then when you say, listen, we're going to charge you $80,000 a year, $150,000 a year, you can articulate the value, which means you can charge, we could call it like a fair price, if you like, or a price that's kind of commensurate with the value that they get from the product. So again, I think pre-product market fit is very difficult to do that. I think if you've started to find product market fit, it's easier to set a price that is it's a price that shows you're working in partnership versus you're kind of almost giving it away just to get traction and people using it.
I think that's a fascinating point. I guess there must be a kind of internal dilemma there around number of logos and workload, and obviously trying to get to certain revenue milestones. Because if you give away for so cheap and you've got to continuously onboard customers and assign CS to it, potentially implementation, that's going to chew up a lot of time, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you're going to start you will start to need to hire a team. And that's another product market fit thing is, you feel really, really stretched because you think, wow, we've suddenly won some customers. They're talking to us about their use of the product, the features that we might need to build, the ways in which they want to use it. Well, actually, your team of 5, 6, 7 people may well no longer be enough to service that demand. And this is a tricky one because I think it's very, very easy actually for startups to hire really aggressively ahead of their growth. And that's a dangerous trap to fall into, clearly. So it's almost like, in the nicest way I can say it, it's almost like the team needs to be at breaking point before you think, well, it's vital we hire, because if we don't hire, we're actually going to start dropping the ball with customers. And I think that's a balance that can be very hard to strike at times.
Especially now when VC funding and capital is so hard to find. A lot of these are running off maybe one round or even bootstrapped.
Absolutely.
So that kind of that maths that gets you to like optimal efficiency must be very tightrope. That must be a tightrope they're walking all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, interesting. I think if I guess one of the advantages of a SaaS model, a SaaS pricing model, is you have a sense that you are locking in revenue from a customer for, let's say, 12 or 24 or 36 months, which gives you a good foundation to build on. But at the same time, I think that product market fit phase, you absolutely don't want to hire a bunch of people and then find your early customers are all churning because they don't have the use cases and the value you thought they did. So absolutely, like it's a fine balancing act between having a team that's stretched but still able to deliver a good service, and a team that tips over the edge and you start dropping the ball with customers. So it's a really, really hard balancing act.
And I'd imagine just one last thing on that question, because I think that was super interesting, that I guess culturally as well, everybody's been in an environment where you feel like you're working every hour that God's giving for a common cause, as you say, which is important. If everybody leans in and is on board with it, great. But that has a certain lifespan, doesn't it? And as soon as that culture kind of drops off a little bit, obviously that can be a force magnifier for losing the customers, and it can all come crashing down, I'd imagine. So I know that's not an example that you've been in, but I can imagine as well that is difficult from a leadership and kind of cultural leadership perspective too. Okay, cool. So in terms of the couple of last questions on this part of the episode, as we're running up close to the half an hour. So in terms of the product market fit, how do you go about, so let's go one step on from that. So how do you go about scaling and like, how do you go about setting maybe revenue targets for that said business?
Yeah, sure. I think there's probably a few things you need in place at that stage. So I think if you're going to set revenue targets, you need to feel like you have a defined kind of customer profile that you're selling to and a market that you're selling to. Could be more than one, but that needs to be defined. I think you need to have some kind of repeatable sales process in place, so you know what it takes to sell, how long it takes to sell, what ARR is realistic to command from a customer. And then I think from a revenue target point of view, you need to kind of have a sense as a business of like, well, what are the milestones you're trying to hit? So to give you a simple example, at Permutive, we knew that our first milestone was, could we get to $1 million ARR? And then, beyond that, well, can we get to $5 million or $10 million ARR? And what's a realistic time frame to do that? So clearly, this also comes back to, how many salespeople are you going to hire? What do you think they're going to do in terms of their ability to hit their targets and all sorts? So I feel there are a few things that go into this. And then there's obviously things like in those early stages of growth, for example, how do you think about cost per acquisition of a customer? How do you think about your gross margin for customers that you've got? So I think there's kind of a number of different factors to consider. But a big driver really is, what is the ARR that you think it's possible to command from a customer? And lots of things can come off the back of that, because that probably sets some expectations around that, plus the length of a sales cycle, set some expectations around how quickly you're going to grow revenue and how many people are you going to hire to grow that revenue.
Okay. So obviously the lifeblood of any successful startup are the people you hire. Hiring A players, I always find a bit of a funny thing to say, but obviously you want to find the best of the best.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be very difficult with a company or a product that is either pre-revenue or just has very early customer base. What are the key learnings that you personally have had in your career around trying to hire the best people?
Yeah, I think from that kind of startup phase, if you like. So say startups that are going from a seed round to a Series A and then beyond that. I think a big learning is like you have to hire the people for the stage of growth that you're at. I've worked with some outstanding salespeople, outstanding product marketers, outstanding marketers, um, but not all of them fit the stage of a particular stage of growth. So, if you're joining a startup at a seed stage or seed to Series A, you have to be able to deal with probably quite a lot of chaos, being very self sufficient and doing lots of things yourself, um, dealing with a lack of repeatable process because it kind of hasn't been created yet. Now, some people thrive in that environment and some people absolutely hate it. And I think you kind of have to think really carefully when you're hiring about how do you find people that are going to fit into the stage that you're at. And there, I also think if you're a startup that's scale or you become a scale up, you're at Series B or Series C. Again, it's like the hiring that you do there is probably for people who are more comfortable with plugging into an established process than people are happy to kind of make it up a bit as they go along. So absolutely, you want to hire high performers, people who are going to do an outstanding job, particularly in a sales capacity. But I do think understanding their characteristics and what they want and whether they fit to your current stage of growth is key. The other thing I think is lots of people probably think they want to join a startup. There's lots that's cool about a startup. You might get options. You might think it's your $1 million payday at some point when the company has an exit. But actually, the reality of being in a team when there's 10 of you and you're trying to scale all this stuff can be incredibly hard. And that's where I think that just does not suit everybody. So really trying to sense check that and sense check somebody's understanding of what they're getting themselves into. Like you can hire the most brilliant person, but if you're hiring them at the stage that they don't fit with, either, they will leave or they will struggle, or it's just it's almost like a bad fit on both sides sometimes, I think.
Yeah, as I say, from I think that's a really interesting point from working in the scale up and startup space for so long myself as well, from a recruitment standpoint. Do you feel maybe then somebody has to have gone through that experience to really understand if that's something that they're into or not, or do you think almost ignorance is bliss and you can kind of hire on personality traits alone?
It's a great question. I kind of think, just like anything, I think if somebody is really determined that they are going to do it and they're going to make it work. So, for example, they come from a corporate environment and they want to make their career in early stage startups. I really believe like anybody can transition into things. I've transitioned through different roles and companies in my career. I think it's just people doing that with a very clear sense of expectation and what they're getting themselves into. Because I think if you're adaptable, you're a problem solver, and get your hands dirty is a bit of a cheesy phrase, but you are willing to do that. I really believe you can make it work, but it's almost like you can't just go into it. You can't go into early stage startups because you just think it's a cool thing to do. You really have to go into it with your eyes open, and I think that's on the person that's hiring as well to set those
Mm.
expectations really clearly.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Let's switch lanes then into into the RVP playbook that I know that you've, as I say, co-authored with Jason Creane. Really interesting, piece of content that you put together over a number of weeks. I think when we met, many numbers of weeks. So um, when you've launched this, it seems to have been received extremely well from what I can see on within our world and obviously online. So big congratulations to both you and Jason for that.
Thank you.
Can you tell the people that are listening to this a little bit about that RVP playbook and sort of why you felt it was important to build that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess this takes that, it takes that early stage growth phase, and we're progressing probably 2, 3, 4 years in the average SaaS startup. So there are kind of two or three things behind it that drove us to put it together. So I guess to give some context, Jason and I have known each other for many years. We've worked together, and he is an RVP, so regional vice president at a business called Zscaler today. We had talked a lot about SaaS sales together. as you do. And I guess we both realized, first of all, we had a lot of knowledge in our heads about what it takes to successfully sell technology to customers. We wanted to collaborate on something and kind of work on something together. We'd both seen really common patterns across SaaS businesses that are really successful, building and scaling, outstanding teams, and maybe a few patterns across SaaS businesses that can struggle. And then between the two of us, I think we had our own kind of sense of ideas around like, what do we think is best practice in SaaS sales teams? And I think I'd stress there, that was, let's put together this playbook on best practice. It doesn't mean they're rules. It doesn't mean it's all correct. There are other ways to do things clearly, but let's kind of document what we think is best practice for some of these things, put it out into the SaaS sales community, see if people agree with us, see if people have feedback, see if people have different ways of doing things that are just as effective. So as a kind of, as something to, I guess, give out to the SaaS sales community for feedback, for questions, challenges, and so on, we thought it was a really good thing to spend our time on.
Yeah, I've obviously listened to this before we filmed. Such amazing sort of insight across both of your careers, but I think you frame it as the start of a discussion, which I thought was quite nice.
Yeah.
And how that evolves, we'll see. But anybody that hasn't listened to it, definitely we'll put like a link to that on the episode when this goes live. Is that document and framework and ideas applicable to any business of any size in SaaS?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. So I guess to give the context of a starting point, Jason had been promoted to a role of RVP at Zscaler, which is like a second line leader. So the RVP has VPs reporting to them, and those VPs have a bunch of regional directors, I should say, and those regional directors have a bunch of ICs reporting to them. And I think it started with Jason thinking, nobody's written a guide for how I do this job, and here's some ideas on it. So I do think, though, it's applicable to different roles, different growth stages. So I think, say, we've had great feedback and engagement from people in a CRO role or a VP sales role. Lots of individual contributors have talked to us about it. And I think what's interesting is we kind of ended up feeling actually there's lots of things in there that are applicable, say, to the ways in which you might go about running sales cycles with customers, or internally validating that things have been completed, or how to then take some of that stuff and think about how you forecast accurately. So obviously all of these different SaaS companies that we've been talking to have different shapes and sizes, different team structures. So I think we would hope kind of things in there that are applicable to lots of different people who work in a variety of roles within kind of the revenue part of SaaS organizations.
Yeah, I know it's only just gone live a few weeks ago. Is that right? The first episode?
Yeah, so we published the kind of hard copy playbook just towards the end of February, and ran a webinar that a bunch of people joined as well.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And you mentioned there that you cover a broad spectrum of topics that hopefully find alignment and cure problems across a broad set of problems within that RVP playbook. But you mentioned that there were some sort of consistent things that kept on getting raised by your guests or people that had tuned into that episode. So maybe we'll cover a couple of them now, and you can share a little bit of kind of teaser insight into those, if you will. Sure. One of which is I don't know if this is a universal term, but PG, which stands for pipeline generation, as an acronym. And then we can go on to the other two, but why don't we start there?
Yeah, sure. So I guess pipeline generation is the term that we use for like generating new opportunities. So I think lots of companies have different phrases for this, but we would say, there's a company that you want to break into and try and sell to, and your pipeline generation are your efforts essentially to book a meeting to sell your solution to that company or to start a sales cycle. And I think what we found that was very interesting was across a wide variety of different people that have talked to us about the playbook, they've seen kind of challenges within how they generate new pipeline within kind of, say, a customer vertical that they're trying to break into. And two or three things we talk about in the playbook include pipeline generation being kind of this team-based activity. pipeline generation being something that has actually quite a lot of structure to it. It's interesting that we've had a lot of feedback, and this resonates with me. Probably something I've done in my career is almost like trying to open new opportunities is something you do when you've got a bit of downtime in the week. So you think, okay, I must generate some new pipeline. It's Wednesday afternoon. I've got an hour between meetings. I'm going to send some LinkedIn messages, or I'm going to email someone I haven't spoken to for a while. I'm going to try and ring somebody. And I think not to say that is wrong, or it might not generate a new opportunity for you. But I guess coming back to that theme of best practice, something we've seen so many companies do that kind of have a really good repeatable model for this centers on them doing these activities as teams, measuring in the right way, and I guess just having it as something that people are very, very focused on doing. So those are things we kind of talk about in the playbook quite a lot, and things that we've had a lot of feedback around, with people saying either I'm going to kind of implement something you're suggesting, or actually we do it in a slightly different way to how you're describing and we get great results. Well, fantastic. On the point of it being a discussion, I guess we have encouraged feedback and people telling us about like their own ways of approaching these topics.
Okay. I guess there's nuances to every business, every problem that's being solved, and every sort of company culture. But on those answers where they're saying, actually, it works this way, are you seeing any sort of consistent themes across those particular answers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things that I'd pull out from that is one, there are clear targets set around it. So however you're setting up to do it, however you're enabling your team to do it, whatever your SDRs or your individual contributors are doing, there are targets and measurement. So it's kind of something that people are consciously looking at and saying, we generated new pipeline last week, it was this much, we can measure how we did it. So that's definitely a theme. I think if you think of the opposite of that, we're not measuring it at all, there are no targets, well, it's probably unlikely you're going to be doing it to an outstanding level, I think.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's come out as a theme is definitely the way in which teams organize around the things that work and the things that don't. So, probably lots of people listening to this will think, well, part of my role is to generate new opportunities for my company. And it's interesting that the way people organize themselves internally around best practice, what are the snippets of customer stories that work when you're generating pipeline? What are the ways in which you get LinkedIn to work for you, or phone calls to work for you, or networking events to work for you? I think the companies that do it really well and feed back to us are the ones where they have some organization around that and they share what's working. It's like, much though as an IC, you might be trying to generate opportunities for yourself. Ultimately, the more opportunities you generate as a business, it's like all boats rise, the business is going to do better. So I think that common theme of people sharing best practice and the piece around kind of targets and measurement, definitely things that we've got back from the sales community around things that people do around, I guess, best practice for PG.
Yeah, cool. Okay. And a progression matrix. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Jason's not here, but I fully credit him. Credit where credit's due on all of this, and it's very much kind of a Jason invention, I suppose, or something Jason came up with within Zscaler. The thought behind this was as your opportunities are progressing, so through this structured sales process that you have in your business, how do you as an RVP actually know, splitting different opportunities out, that they're kind of progressing in a structured way, but they're progressing in a way where kind of risks have been mitigated. And I guess the progression is accurate. So I'm sure I'm not the only salesperson who has thought I'm further ahead in a sales cycle than I am. It's quite a common thing. But the concept of the progression matrix is essentially, you have a number of items that you're trying to complete to feel like you are having real progression in an opportunity. And this concept is actually pretty simple, which is if you put across the top of the matrix your kind of forecasting category. So are you forecasting, for example, that you commit this deal will close? And if you are, what are the indicators versus kind of internal gates or activities that you might need to complete that commit deal looks like it's in a healthy state, I suppose, versus an unhealthy state. So this concept of the progression matrix, again, something we got great feedback on, and I think something that can really easily be adapted to any team to use. So we give a blank template, funnily enough, in the playbook, but you can make one yourself for your business really, really quickly. And I think it's just a really good way to sense check progress.
Okay, cool. And finally, the customer gates concept.
Yeah. So again, another thing we've got a lot of feedback on. The idea of customer gates is essentially, are you as progressed through the sales cycle as the customer thinks you are? Because I think, again, misalignment, you can think that your sales cycle is going brilliantly, but if you go and talk to the customer about how you're making progress, would they actually agree? And I think the common thing is probably you feel you're further ahead than the customer does. So this idea of customer gates, I guess we came up with, is that there are kind of validation points that the customer needs to confirm to ensure that you're progressing at a rate that means you're aligned with the customer rather than a long way ahead of them. So an example might be a customer saying to you, yes, we agree that the ROI model you've created is valid, and we're going to go off and we're going to get that approved internally. If they say that, fantastic. It's a very simple example. If they say, no, actually, we're not ready to do that, what does that tell you? And are there things in there where you'd feel concerned, or the customer feels concerned that actually there may be gaps, or there are things that they're just not comfortable with that you can explore a bit further? So I guess that's a very quick, high-level view of the concept of a customer gate.
Okay, cool. So for slightly, I know we both worked in smaller companies, but for larger, more mature, structured organizations, are the things that you cover within the RVP playbook still applicable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of comes back to what we were talking about hiring. I think, again, people might read the playbook, read the introduction and think, well, we do all this already. But I think having a playbook tailored to the stage of growth that you're at is pretty important. And I think even if you work in a bigger organization and you feel you're more mature in some of these things, I guess you often feel the sense that you want to like review the way you do things, maybe optimize the way you do things. Chatting to a company last week, and they said, we have a couple of regions that we think are following kind of playbook processes pretty well, but we have a couple of regions that aren't. They just do things slightly differently. So I think in bigger organizations, that's pretty common, right? That different regions or departments or teams can do things slightly differently. So I definitely think that there are pieces that are very applicable. And the other thing I'd say is, if you think lots of the SaaS companies that we talk to, that one that Jason works in, those sales cycles can be 6, 9, 12 months or even longer. So there's so much you can enhance and improve about that process because it goes on for a while, that can lead to better outcomes. So I think often, like, looking with fresh eyes at ways you do things is a really good way to kind of just understand where the areas for improvement are. And in environments of like continuous learning, I think, well, the learning isn't just about individuals. That's also about, say, an RVP or a VP sales constantly learning and wanting to enhance what the team does as well.
So sales excellence and sales methodologies are a hot topic across our space. There are some sort of MedPick, for example, Challenger, Sandler, Miller Hyman, all these kind of things come up consistently with some of the great sales leaders and revenue leaders out there. Why do you think that sales excellence and sales methodologies are so important, even for early stage companies?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of reasons for any company. There's a couple of reasons I think probably pretty common. One is, I feel whether you're early stage or you're a really progressed company, I think it just gives you a map with which you can find your way. So say sales methodologies like MedPick you mentioned gives you a map by which you can say, we kind of know where we are and we've got a sense of the activities that we're undertaking and like why we're undertaking them. And also, I think it helps you speak a common language. I think that's a big problem can be if lots of different people in your organization are describing things in different ways. So I think it can give you a common language. ultimately, I think lots of this comes down to whether you're a small, early stage company or a more mature company. You really want to deliver an outstanding experience for the
Yeah.
customer. You want to help them buy the right solution. And let's be honest, sometimes the right solution might not be your company, might not be your solution, but you want to guide them through and help them in their buying process just as much as you want to run a sales process. So I think if a lot of that is focused on the customer, delivering an outstanding service and experience to them, I think for people listening to this as well, who doesn't want to deliver an outstanding customer experience? So I feel all of this sense of sales excellence and methodologies that you might use are really all focused around that, like helping the customer have an outstanding experience and run a process that's right for them to, select technology for their company.
Yeah. I keep referring back to the webinar that I watched, but when you asked a similar question to Jason in that episode, he articulated it, really, really well. And it actually changed the way that I thought about sales somewhat, because it reversed it in terms of actually you're just trying to create the best possible client experience to come to the outcome, whether that be your solution or not. It was interesting for sure. Okay, look, in terms of the characteristics of hiring the team, like personality traits, what are the key things that you look for in building a high functioning team?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a whole playbook coming on recruitment as well. So in when we get round to finishing it off, we'll talk more about this. But I think there are kind of 2 or 3 traits that I think are super important. And interestingly, I think these are important traits whether you are hiring somebody when your company's 10 people or 100 or 1,000 people. I really believe in kind of SaaS sales. Ultimately, you're there to be a problem solver. You're there to help your customer solve problems. You're probably there to solve problems yourself within your own organization. But I really think that problem solving mindset and a resilience that goes with it can't be overstated. And for anyone that works in sales, sales is not just about the customers that sign contracts. It's about the customers that don't want to talk to you and the knocks and setbacks that you have. So I think that kind of problem solving and resilient mentality is really, really important. The other thing I'd say is I feel like the best salespeople and arguably the best customer success people and the best solutions engineers and all these folks are real experts in the product. They really understand the product deeply and they understand the problems it solves. And I think that probably kind of leads to people who really care about solving the customer's pain points. That's about more than just almost like running a sales playbook of, can I get the customer to talk to me about their problems so I can tell them how my product solves their problems? I really think you have to really care about that. You have to care about the person you're selling to. What is the impact on them if they manage to solve these problems? Maybe they get promoted. Maybe they get a pay rise. Maybe they get given more responsibility. But I really think you have to care about solving those customer pain points, and be able to obviously clearly articulate why your product solves them. But to me, that is also just having empathy for your customer, and really, like I say, ultimately caring about the outcomes you're going to deliver for them.
Okay. In terms of 2024, I mean, it's kind of crazy times in the software space. We talked a little bit about funding and, obviously the performance of some companies across, post-COVID boom. In your opinion, what do you see as good growth in today's market? And how has that kind of just changed in the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, ultimately, I think good growth is finding long-term customers. Good sustainable growth is finding long-term customers for whom you're going to solve a set of problems and you're going to continue solving those problems for a long time. And I guess the opposite of that is, finding customers where actually it's a bad fit, or finding customers where actually you're solving problems they don't really care about, for example. There's just a misfit between the two. So I don't think that's changed. I think there's absolutely changes in companies rationalizing the way they purchase software, companies reducing the amount of software they want to buy, and maybe some other changes in kind of buyer behavior about how detailed and thorough their buying process is going to be. So it's almost like, from a sales perspective, the ability to establish value, to establish value and then kind of drive towards the outcomes you'll deliver is even more important. The other thing, and I was on a call recently where someone described it this way, and I thought it was brilliant. In MedPIC terminology, the economic buyer. I think if the economic buyer may well have shifted in bigger companies, certainly making bigger purchases, to actually be the CFO. So it's like the CFO or finance director or whatever they're called may well have the ultimate yes/no. Whereas previously maybe they were just part of an approval process. I think it's probably quite common that the economic buyer has shifted to be the CFO, and ultimately they can say no when other people want to say yes. So I think that shift means, the thoroughness with which you run a sales cycle, the value you have to prove, the way you have to kind of tie all that together, means you have to be more meticulous and more thorough in the sales cycle that you're running.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're running pretty close to the hour now. So last question from my side. For any new sales leaders or revenue leaders out there that might be, just tuning in for the first time or just starting out their kind of journey in this space, it's a broad question, but what advice, if you could give them a few little bits of advice, what advice would you give them?
Obviously, my first advice is read the RVP Playbook.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of things spring to mind. I think for anybody that finds themselves in that role, I think there's a lot to be said for thinking about how you will kind of have your own stamp and your own personality on things, but how are you going to set and maintain kind of standards of excellence within your team? So we could talk a lot about what that means, but I feel like having a bar of standards or excellence and maintaining that across everybody that works under you in that team is vital. And clearly, like, leading by example and leading with some vision is a big part of that. I talked at the start about kind of visionary leaders I've worked for, people able to articulate a vision and help you understand your part in realizing it, if you like. So I think setting and maintaining those standards of excellence and being a really visionary leader is super valuable. And the other thing I'd say, we talked about this a few minutes ago, is I really believe, like, how do you put the customer at the center of what you're doing? Because I think if you can do that and you can think customer first versus your business first, you have a much better chance of succeeding. And I think that permeates through everything that you do to generate new opportunities, to run outstanding sales cycles, to deliver customers that are going to be customers of your business for years to come, which ultimately is, what you're going to need to do if you're going to grow your business. There's no point bringing on customers that churn. So I think having the customer at the center of everything you do is really critical. And I think it's something, as, say, a sales leader, is something that you can emphasize and kind of reinforce at every opportunity.
Okay. Final piece. I mean, the RVP Playbook, we will obviously, put on the links when we put this live. And, as we said all the way through the episode, I think it's such a great resource. But RVP Playbook aside, are there any communities or resources or events that you found really useful to try and accelerate that kind of learning?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I'm a big fan of the Hunters and Unicorns podcast, which is fantastic. They get some fantastic guests on there. I'm a big fan of 2 or 3 books. So Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon, I think, is a brilliant resource. There's a brilliant book called The Champions Sell by Richard Rivera that I read last year. Again, fantastic. I often think those are books that you can go back to. It's like they're on your desk and you might reference them. Once a month you pick it up and flick to a section and think about it. So yeah, I'll give those as brief recommendations to anyone that's listening in.
Yeah, no, the Hunts and Unicorns podcast is really good. I would agree with you totally there. So look, we've got 1 or 2 minutes left. Okay, just a little bit of fun, more fun than we've already been having, I should say, right? Quick fire questions just to kind of get to know you a little bit more, okay, a little bit better. So first thing that comes into your head, not too much thought, please. Favorite piece of tech or app you are using now?
Uh, I really like the Met Office app.
Okay. Okay. iOS or Android?
Android,
Night at the disco or night at the restaurant?
disco,
Okay. Favorite food?
cheeseburger.
Okay. Favorite movie?
Oh, oh golly. Goodfellas.
Okay. If you were to describe yourself in 2 words, what would it be and why?
Oh no. It wasn't oh no, by the way. If I could describe myself in 2 words, thoughtful. There's one word. Oh, now I've been more worried about this section than the whole of it. Thoughtful and team player.
Okay, fine. Favorite place that you visited on holiday or just generally visited in your life?
Sri Lanka.
Great. What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh no, here's another terrible one. Love It or List It with Phil and Kirsty on Channel 4.
Oh wow. If you had one superpower, what would it be and why?
Teleportation?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's lots of places I'd like to visit, and I feel like you could just get lots of places quickly.
I thought you were going to say, and you're a nervous flyer. So yeah, no. Okay, great. Hey, let's wrap it up there. Look, Richard, thank you so much. I really hope that's been one, good fun, and two, kind of shared some great insight into some of the stuff you've learned over your amazing career. We've talked about the RVP playbook. So anybody that's listened to this and wants to kind of tune into that and try and understand that a bit more, what's the best way to do that?
Good question. Find me on LinkedIn, maybe it's the quickest way. And it's a free resource, of course. We'll send it to anybody that would like it.
Yeah.
Find me on LinkedIn, and I can share a copy.
Yeah, and your email address, just in case people are listening and want to get in touch.
Oh, thank you.
Do you mind sharing?
Richard@gtmadvisory.co.uk.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for being such a great guest, and we'll obviously catch up very soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Simon, for having me on.